I started my business with a single idea, an idea that I was sure would change everything. I was fresh out of college, with an engineering degree in my pocket, and a head full of dreams. I had no idea about the harsh realities of entrepreneurship, but I was ready to dive in head first. I had been working at a small tech startup, doing software development for about 2 years. It was a decent job, but I knew in my gut that this wasn't my path. The company was growing, and with it, so were my frustrations. There was no room for innovation or creative freedom, and I was stuck in the same repetitive cycles. Every day felt like the same loop, and I could already predict the next few months. My heart wasn't in it anymore. One night, sitting at my desk, I had an epiphany. I was thinking about all the apps I'd worked on, how they had certain features that never quite worked as expected. These little glitches were often overlooked, but I realized something crucial. People didn't just want things to work, they wanted them to feel seamless. They wanted everything to function like it was meant to be. That was the moment I knew what I had to do: create a business that would focus on user experience, UX, design. Something that would go beyond functionality and prioritize intuitive design. The decision wasn't an easy one. I had student loans, a steady paycheck, and the security of a full-time job. But after months of mulling it over, I quit. I didn't have a concrete plan, just a vision. I knew I could do better, and I wasn't about to wait for someone else to take the risk. With no savings to fall back on, I had to scrape together every penny I could. I rented a small office space in a shared building, which was essentially a single room with a desk and a window overlooking a narrow alley. The rent was cheap, and I couldn't afford anything fancier. I spent my days working on mock-ups, reading about UX principles, and reaching out to anyone I could find who might be interested in the services I was trying to offer. I started offering my services as a freelance UX consultant, and I pitched it like I had a long history in the field. My pitch was simple. I specialize in creating intuitive designs that solve real user problems. But the problem was, I had no real track record. No one cared about my pitch. It took a while to land my first client, but finally, after what felt like endless cold calls and emails, someone took a chance on me. The job was a small project for a local tech company. They needed a redesign for their mobile app. It wasn't much money, but it was my foot in the door. The first project was a nightmare. The client kept changing their mind. The design software crashed multiple times, and I was working 18-hour days just to meet the deadline. But when the app was finished, the client was thrilled. It was a huge moment for me, the first taste of success that made all the sleepless nights worth it. But it was also a stark lesson. The journey was going to be filled with obstacles. I'd have to learn to adapt, manage client expectations, and handle the stress of 1,000 little things breaking down at once. With that small success behind me, I started getting more work. I could see the potential. People started referring me to their friends, and soon I had enough clients to justify hiring my first employee. I couldn't afford to hire someone with a lot of experience, so I brought on a fresh graduate with a background in graphic design. At that point, it was just the two of us in that tiny office, but we managed to land more projects. I was always on the lookout for talented individuals who could help grow the company. As we expanded, things got trickier. I realized I couldn't do it all alone anymore. So I hired more people, developers, designers, even a project manager. We moved into a bigger office, and suddenly I was responsible for not just the quality of the work, but also the livelihoods of the people I hired. It was a strange feeling. I wasn't just building a business, I was shaping the future for my team as well. Then, one of the most unexpected things happened. The bigger project started rolling in. I had landed a deal with a major software company that needed a complete overhaul of their user interface. It was a huge opportunity, and I knew it could make or break the business. But the client was notorious for being difficult, and the pressure was immense. The project dragged on for months. There were constant changes, last-minute requests, and more than a few moments when I felt like we weren't going to make it. We pushed through, though. I had to work with my team day and night, making sure that every detail was perfect, that everything flowed seamlessly. It was a turning point for us. We were no longer a small startup. We were beginning to build a reputation for delivering quality work, no matter how challenging the project. When we finally finished the project and presented it to the client, they loved it. They were ecstatic with the results. But the real reward came when they offered us another contract. Their entire suite of products needed a redesign. That's when I realized we were no longer the underdogs. We had made it. We were now competing with the big players in the field. The next few years were a blur. We grew rapidly, landed more clients, and started offering additional services like user research and usability testing. The business wasn't just a job anymore, it was my life. But with growth came new challenges. Cash flow issues, difficult clients, project delays. Every step forward felt like 2 steps back. I learned quickly that entrepreneurship wasn't about success after success. It was about managing failure and constantly adapting. One day, we had a meeting with a potential client who could have been a game changer for us. They were one of the biggest companies in the tech industry, and their UX was notoriously bad. The meeting started off well, and they seemed excited about our pitch. But as soon as we showed them our portfolio, they asked, "Do you have experience working with clients of our size?" It stung, but I kept my cool. I told them, "We may not have worked with companies as big as yours, but we've worked with companies that want to grow as big as you. And that's what sets us apart. We grow with you." A few days later, they called and offered us the project. That was the moment I realized the key to entrepreneurship isn't just having the right skills or ideas. It's about believing in your ability to adapt and grow alongside your clients. Fast forward to today. The company I started in that tiny office is now one of the most respected UX firms in the industry. We've worked with major clients, launched dozens of successful products, and created a company culture that's built on collaboration and creativity. The team I started with has grown into a family, and we continue to push the boundaries of what's possible in design. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far we've come. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I thought about quitting. But here I am, running a successful business, and I'm proud of everything we've built. Entrepreneurship is a long, tough road, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. It all started in the summer of 2015. I was 24 years old, fresh out of college, and living with my parents in a small town. I had just graduated with a degree in business administration, and the excitement of getting my first job was quickly overshadowed by the realization that landing one wasn't going to be as easy as I thought. Every job I applied for seemed to require experience that I didn't have. And for a while, I was stuck in this frustrating loop of rejection letters and automated emails. I had always been the type of person to seek opportunities in unconventional places. After months of feeling down about my job search, I took a step back to rethink my approach. I spent some time reading books, articles, and watching TED Talks, anything that would inspire me or spark an idea. One night, I came across a podcast episode that discussed the idea of starting a side hustle, something that didn't require a huge initial investment but could grow into something more substantial over time. The seed was planted. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through social media, when I noticed a popular trend. People were selling custom t-shirts online. At first, I thought, okay, maybe that's not a bad idea. I didn't have a huge budget, but I knew I could invest a little bit into designing some t-shirts and seeing if there was any market for them. I had a basic understanding of graphic design from college, and although I wasn't a pro, I figured I could create something that looked decent. The first obstacle I faced was how to actually create and sell the shirts. I didn't have the funds to purchase a bunch of inventory up front, so I turned to print-on-demand (POD) services. With POD, I could upload my designs, and when someone made a purchase, the company would print and ship the product for me. No inventory, no overhead. It was perfect for someone like me with no money to spare. I created an online store on a platform called Shopify. It was relatively easy to use, but building a website that looked good and functioned well took time. I spent hours tinkering with the design, tweaking the color schemes, and testing different layouts. Once I was satisfied with the look, I started uploading my designs, funny quotes, inspirational messages, and quirky graphics. It was a niche that hadn't been overly saturated yet, and I was excited to see if people would bite. I remember the first day I launched the store. I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. I wasn't expecting to get rich overnight, but I hoped to at least make a sale. I shared the link on all my social media platforms and asked a few friends to help spread the word. After what felt like an eternity, I got my first sale. A stranger in a different state had bought one of my shirts. I was ecstatic. It was only one sale, but it was proof that this could work. The next few weeks were a blur of late nights and constant learning. I spent hours reading about digital marketing, social media strategies, and SEO. I realized that simply having a store wasn't enough. I needed to get the word out there, to drive traffic to my site. I started running Facebook ads with tiny budgets, experimenting with different targeting strategies to see what worked best. Slowly but surely, the sales trickled in. But even as things started to gain momentum, I encountered a whole new set of challenges. First, I learned that while the pod service handled the printing and shipping, they also took a large cut of each sale. That was a tough pill to swallow, especially when I realized that I wasn't making as much per shirt as I had hoped. I had to get creative about how to market my brand to make up for the lower profit margins. I also faced issues with customer satisfaction. Some of the shirts didn't turn out as high quality as I expected. A few customers complained about the print quality, while others had issues with delivery times. I quickly realized that customer service was key to keeping the business running. I made it a priority to respond to every inquiry, fix any problems quickly, and always remain professional, no matter how frustrated or upset a customer might be. Despite these challenges, I kept pushing forward. I learned to optimize my ads, narrowed my target audience, and started partnering with influencers to promote my products. One influencer with a small but loyal following posted about my shirts, and that led to a significant increase in sales. Slowly, the brand began to build its own identity. I started getting repeat customers, and the word-of-mouth referrals picked up. After about a year, the business had grown enough that I could quit my day job. It wasn't making millions, but I had enough steady income coming in from the t-shirt sales to justify taking the leap. This was one of the scariest decisions I had ever made, but it was also the most rewarding. I had gone from being unemployed and feeling lost to running my own business. In the second year, I expanded my product line. I added hoodies, hats, and mugs. I also started paying more attention to the branding aspect, creating a consistent, recognizable image for my business. I knew that this was no longer just a side hustle, it was becoming a real brand. But with growth came new hurdles. I realized that running a business was a lot more complicated than just making and selling products. There were taxes, accounting, legal issues, inventory management. Even with Pod, there were challenges, and most importantly, scaling the operation to a point where I could hire employees. In 2018, I brought on my first employee, a graphic designer. She helped me create new, fresh designs, while I focused on growing the business in other ways. That was another pivotal moment for me. I had always done everything myself, but it became clear that I couldn't do it all if I wanted to continue growing. By the end of 2019, I had a small team working with me, people who believed in the brand and helped me bring it to the next level. Fast forward to today. My brand is no longer just a passion project, it's a full-fledged business. We have a solid online presence, a loyal customer base, and a small but dedicated team. We've expanded to other merchandise categories, and I've even started selling in retail stores. But the journey hasn't been easy. There were many sleepless nights, countless mistakes, and moments of doubt. But looking back, I'm incredibly proud of how far we've come. It hasn't been a straight path, and the road ahead is still filled with challenges, but I know now that anything is possible with hard work, perseverance, and a willingness to learn. If you're reading this and thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple: don't wait for the perfect moment. There will never be a perfect time. Just start, learn as you go, and stay committed. It's the only way to truly find out if you have what it takes to make it as an entrepreneur. I still remember the excitement of that first sale. It was the moment I knew that this dream, this idea I had, could turn into something real. And if I can do it, so can you. I remember the first day I decided to quit my 9-to-5 job. It was a Wednesday morning, a cool spring day, and I was sitting at my desk, watching the clock tick slowly toward 9 a.m. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed, and the sound of keyboard typing and hushed office chatter filled the room. But I couldn't focus. My mind was elsewhere. For weeks, I had been thinking about this moment, and now it felt inevitable. I had always been the kind of person who followed the rules. I did what was expected, went to school, got the degree, and landed the corporate job. The pay was decent, the benefits were great, and I had a clear path ahead of me. But somewhere along the way, I started feeling like I was living someone else's life. I spent my days at a desk, helping to move numbers around, contributing to a system that never felt aligned with my true interests or passions. It wasn't just the job itself that made me miserable, it was the feeling of being stuck. I was climbing a corporate ladder that I didn't even want to be on. The promotions didn't excite me. The praise didn't fuel me. The prospect of a higher salary didn't feel like a reward. I started questioning what I was really working for. Was this the life I wanted to lead? Did I really want to wake up every day and do the same thing for the next 30 years? The breaking point came one afternoon when I was sitting in a meeting. My manager was discussing the new project we were about to start, and everyone around me was nodding in agreement, excited about the next phase of work. I was nodding too, but internally, all I could think was, I can't do this anymore. I realized then that I had no passion for the work. It wasn't just that I didn't like it, it felt like I was wasting my time. There was a whole world out there, full of opportunities, and I felt like I was letting it slip away. That night, I went home and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the blank page of my journal. I wrote down everything I was feeling, how trapped I felt, how unfulfilled I was, how badly I wanted to break free. I had no idea what would come next, but I knew that staying in this job was no longer an option. It was time for a change. I spent the next few weeks researching different career paths. I knew I wanted to work for myself, but I had no clue where to start. I had no experience in entrepreneurship, no savings to fall back on, and no clear idea of what kind of business I wanted to create. I was scared, terrified, even. But something deep inside me told me that if I didn't take the risk now, I might never get another chance. I started reading books on entrepreneurship, listening to podcasts, and attending online webinars. I devoured content about successful entrepreneurs who had built their businesses from the ground up, and I realized that they all had one thing in common. They had taken a leap of faith. They had stepped out of their comfort zones and risked everything to follow their passion. That's exactly what I needed to do. The first idea I had was to start a digital marketing agency. I had worked in marketing for a few years at my job, and I had developed a solid understanding of SEO, social media, and content creation. It seemed like a logical choice. But as I thought about it more, I realized that it wasn't something I felt truly excited about. I wasn't passionate about helping businesses grow their online presence. I was passionate about creativity, storytelling, and creating something that would make people's lives better. One day, I was having a conversation with a friend who had recently started a small online store selling handmade candles. She was telling me about her struggles to get her brand off the ground and how overwhelmed she felt by the marketing and design work. That's when it hit me. I could combine my marketing skills with my passion for design and storytelling to help small businesses like hers. I could create a business that focused on branding and marketing for entrepreneurs who were just starting out. I spent the next few weeks building a website, creating a portfolio of mock projects, and reaching out to small business owners on social media. At first, no one responded. It was discouraging, but I didn't give up. I kept refining my pitch, reaching out to more people, and improving my skills. The breakthrough came when I landed my first client. It was a local coffee shop that had recently opened and was struggling to attract customers. I worked tirelessly on their brand identity, designing a logo, crafting a website, and developing a social media strategy. After a few months, the coffee shop sales had doubled, and they were getting more foot traffic than ever before. My client was thrilled, and word of mouth began to spread. I started getting more inquiries from other small businesses, and the ball started rolling. Even though my new venture was gaining momentum, I still faced a lot of challenges. I had no experience running a business, and I was learning everything on the fly. I had to juggle client projects with handling the financial side of things, managing deadlines, and keeping up with the ever-changing digital marketing landscape. It was overwhelming at times, and there were moments when I wondered if I had made a huge mistake. But with every challenge, I learned something new. One of the most difficult moments came when I had to hire my first employee. I was terrified. I wasn't sure if I could afford to pay someone else, and I worried about being a bad boss. But I quickly realized that I needed help if I wanted to grow my business. I hired a freelance graphic designer, and together, we were able to take on more projects and expand our services. A few years into running my business, I began to notice that I was no longer just working for myself. I had built a small team of talented people who were all passionate about helping small businesses succeed. I had gone from being a solo entrepreneur to running a company with employees, clients, and a brand that was making an impact in the community. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far I've come. There have been many sleepless nights, stressful moments, and challenges along the way. But every single struggle has been worth it. I'm not just making money anymore. I'm living a life that feels true to who I am. I'm working on projects I'm passionate about, collaborating with people I admire, and building something that makes a difference. If you're reading this and thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple: take the leap. It's terrifying, yes, but it's also incredibly rewarding. You will face setbacks, but you will also experience moments of triumph that make it all worthwhile. Just remember, success doesn't come overnight, and it's not a straight path. But if you stay persistent, keep learning, and stay true to your vision, you'll eventually find your way. I never thought I'd be an entrepreneur. Growing up, my family didn't have much. My parents worked hard, and I always saw them struggle to make ends meet. They taught me the value of hard work and the importance of stability, but I never really thought about how I could make money on my own. It was more about surviving the day-to-day. Fast forward to my early 20s. I graduated from college with a degree in communications and landed a decent job in marketing at a mid-sized firm. It wasn't my dream job, but it was good enough. The pay was steady, the hours were reasonable, and I didn't have to worry about things like health insurance or retirement savings. I had no idea how many people were making big moves in the entrepreneurial world until I started hearing about it from my friends. One night, a friend of mine, Adam, invited me out for drinks. He'd just quit his job at a startup and was about to launch his own tech company. As we sat at the bar, he spoke with such excitement about his plans, how he wanted to create something that would change the way people worked remotely. It was a passion that seemed to drip from his words. As someone who had only ever thought of business as a way to secure a paycheck, I was fascinated by his drive. "You should give it a try," Adam said after a few beers, almost as if he had read my mind. At the time, I brushed it off. Entrepreneurship sounded great in theory, but I wasn't convinced it was for someone like me. My parents had taught me that financial stability and a steady paycheck were the keys to a good life. But over the next few months, I started thinking about it more and more. Maybe I was selling myself short. Maybe there was more to life than just showing up to work and collecting a paycheck. It wasn't until I was laid off from my marketing job that I seriously considered the possibility. The company I worked for had gone through several rounds of layoffs, and the writing was on the wall. One afternoon, I walked into the office only to find out my position had been eliminated. The severance package wasn't much, and I had no idea what to do next. I applied to a few other jobs, but the market was tough, and I wasn't getting any bites. That's when I decided to take the leap. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I had to try something. After some late nights of brainstorming and researching, I figured out that there was a gap in the market for personalized digital marketing services aimed at small businesses. Many small businesses didn't have the resources or the knowledge to market themselves online effectively. They knew they needed to be on social media, but they didn't know how to create content, manage ads, or engage with their audience. I started small, offering my services to a few local businesses. My first client was a small bakery that had a great product, but no online presence. They had an Instagram account, but no strategy for how to grow it. I spent hours researching social media trends and crafting a plan that would showcase their products in a visually appealing way. It wasn't easy, but slowly, their follower count began to grow, and they started seeing an uptick in sales. They were thrilled, and word spread. Before I knew it, I had a few more clients, each with their own unique needs. But the first few months weren't all sunshine and rainbows. I had no experience running a business, and there were days when I felt completely out of my depth. I spent hours watching YouTube videos, reading articles, and talking to other small business owners to learn how to scale and run a business properly. I had to figure out everything, from taxes to setting prices to marketing myself. The learning curve was steep, and there were times when I questioned whether I'd made a huge mistake. But I stuck with it. One of the biggest challenges was pricing. At first, I undercharged because I didn't want to scare off potential clients. But after a few months, I realized I wasn't making enough to sustain myself. So I raised my prices, which was nerve-wracking. I feared that my clients might bail, but they didn't. In fact, they respected that I was offering more value than I had been previously. Slowly but surely, I built a reputation, and referrals began to come in. By the end of my first year, I had a steady stream of clients, and I was making more money than I had at my old job. But I was still operating solo, managing everything myself. I knew that in order to grow, I'd need to bring in some help. It was tough for me to let go of the reins. I had always prided myself on doing everything myself, but I realized I couldn't scale without bringing in others who were just as committed to the business as I was. I hired a small team, 2 content creators, a social media manager, and an assistant to help with scheduling and customer service. It was terrifying to take that step, especially since I was still relatively new to the game. But hiring the right people turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made. With the extra support, I was able to take on more clients, improve the quality of my work, and grow the business faster than I could have alone. One of the most rewarding things about this journey has been watching my clients succeed. I've seen businesses go from barely scraping by to thriving, all thanks to the work we did together. There was one client, a small jewelry store, whose online sales grew by 300% in just 6 months. They were able to hire more staff, expand their product line, and even open a second location. Knowing that I had a hand in their success was incredibly fulfilling. Now, nearly 3 years into running my business, things have changed a lot. I'm no longer a one-person show. I have a full team, and we're in the process of hiring more people as we continue to expand. The business has grown beyond just local clients, and we're now working with clients across the country. The early days of uncertainty and fear seem like a distant memory, but I won't forget them. They were crucial in shaping the person I am today. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. There were so many moments when I could have given up, when the road seemed too difficult, when I wasn't sure if it was all worth it. But I stuck with it, and now I have a business that supports me and my team, and we're doing something we're all passionate about. I'll never say it was easy, but I'm glad I took the leap. Entrepreneurship isn't for everyone, but for me, it was the best decision I ever made. To anyone out there thinking about starting their own business, do it. You don't have to have it all figured out. Take that first step, and the rest will follow. You won't regret it. So, I want to share the story of how I turned a small side hustle into a full-blown business that completely changed my life. It all started when I was in college, trying to make a little extra cash. I was studying engineering, living on a student budget, and like most people my age, I was constantly looking for ways to make some money on the side. I've always been someone who hated the idea of a 9-to-5 grind, so I figured I could use my skills to build something for myself. I've always been into tech and gadgets, so one evening, I was browsing the internet and came across this cool little DIY project to create custom phone cases. At first, it was just a fun idea. I'd seen some people doing it on Etsy, but they were mostly creating designs for a niche audience. However, as I started digging deeper, I realized there was a massive demand for unique, personalized phone accessories. People were willing to pay good money for custom cases, and the best part was that the barrier to entry wasn't too high. You could buy a cheap heat press, design software, and materials to get started. I didn't have a lot of cash, but I decided to go for it. I took out a small loan from a family member, bought a cheap heat press and a few materials, and started making a few test cases in my dorm room. I designed a few simple templates, nothing too fancy, just some basic colors and patterns. I listed them on Etsy, hoping to make a few sales. At first, it was slow. I made a few bucks here and there, but nothing crazy. But I didn't let that discourage me. I kept working at it, refining my designs and trying new marketing strategies. One night, I decided to try something bold. I went on Reddit's r/design subreddit, which was full of artists and creators, and posted a thread offering to make free custom cases for a few people in exchange for reviews. The idea was to get people talking about my products and hopefully build up a little reputation. To my surprise, people jumped on it. I ended up doing a handful of free cases, and the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. People were amazed by the quality of the designs, and a few of them started recommending my shop to their friends. It wasn't long before the orders started rolling in. Slowly but surely, I went from making a few cases a week to making a few cases a day. I spent all my free time working on designs, processing orders, and packing shipments. I was still in school, so it was tough to balance everything, but I loved it. It didn't feel like work. As the business grew, I realized I needed help. I couldn't keep up with the demand by myself, so I hired my first employee, a classmate who was looking for part-time work. I trained her to handle some of the simpler tasks, like packing and shipping, while I focused on the creative side of things. Hiring someone was a big step, and it took a bit of getting used to, but it was a game changer. It freed up more time for me to focus on growing the business and creating new designs. Around this time, I started experimenting with other platforms to reach a wider audience. I opened a store on Shopify and ran some small ads on Facebook and Instagram. The results were mixed at first, but as I refined my targeting and started posting more frequently on social media, sales started to pick up even more. I began reaching customers outside of my immediate circle, and that's when things really started to get interesting. My products went viral on Instagram, and before I knew it, I had influencers and small celebrities reaching out to collaborate. It felt like a dream. The next thing I knew, I was doing custom cases for a few minor celebrities, and that was a huge boost to my credibility. The momentum continued to build, and I expanded my product line. I started offering custom shirts, hoodies, and eventually moved into custom jewelry. It was like opening a floodgate of opportunity. Every new product I added was another chance to connect with my audience and expand the brand. The best part? I had built this brand entirely on my own terms. I wasn't tied to anyone else's vision or constraints. It was a feeling I had never experienced before. By the time I graduated, I had a full-blown business. I had hired a small team of 5 people, including my first employee, and we were working out of a small warehouse. The company was making a good amount of money, but I knew we had only scratched the surface. I decided to go all in. I didn't take a traditional job after college. Instead, I put all my focus into scaling the business. That decision wasn't without its challenges. I made mistakes. I burned through cash at times, trying to expand too quickly. There were months when I thought I might have made the wrong call, especially when sales dipped unexpectedly. But I kept going, trying to learn from each mistake and move forward. I also made it a point to constantly reinvest in the business, whether it was for better equipment, hiring the right people, or upgrading our website. Each decision, each move I made, brought me closer to the vision I had in my head. Fast forward a few years, and the company has grown into something much larger than I ever anticipated. We've expanded internationally, have a solid team of 30-plus employees, and have ventured into a variety of different product categories. The company is now valued at a point where it's not just a side hustle, it's a full-fledged business with millions in annual revenue. I still can't believe how far we've come. What started in my college dorm room as a simple project has turned into a thriving enterprise. And all of this was built on the idea of creating something I loved and being willing to work tirelessly for it. Looking back, there are a few key lessons I learned along the way that I think can help anyone trying to start a business. First, don't underestimate the power of a good community. Reddit, in particular, was instrumental in getting my first few customers and reviews. Second, you have to be willing to fail. I've made countless mistakes, but each one taught me something valuable. And lastly, always invest in yourself and your business. Whether it's learning new skills, getting better equipment, or expanding your team, reinvesting in your business is the only way to grow. So, if you're sitting on an idea or a side hustle, take that leap. You never know where it might take you. If a broke engineering student with a heat press can turn a side gig into a thriving business, then anyone can do it. Believe in your vision, put in the work, and let the results speak for themselves. It's been one heck of a journey, and I'm excited for what's next. I always thought of myself as a go-getter. In high school, I was the kid organizing everything: fundraisers, school dances, and even the talent show. I had a knack for bringing people together, and it felt good to see those events come to life. I thought that would be enough, but life had different plans. It wasn't until I graduated college that I realized my real challenge was just beginning. I went to college with big dreams, studying business administration with a focus on entrepreneurship. I had this image of myself running a sleek startup, maybe in tech or fashion, and changing the world. But that wasn't how things panned out. The real world was tough, and nothing came easy. When I graduated, I quickly found out that the job market wasn't as welcoming as I'd hoped. I sent out hundreds of resumes, went to interviews, but nothing stuck. Every rejection stung. It wasn't just that I couldn't find a job, it was that I felt like I was falling behind. My friends were landing jobs in corporate offices, securing internships at big firms, and I was still trying to figure out what the heck I wanted to do. Then, in a conversation that changed my life, my older brother, who worked in tech, said something that stuck with me. If you're not finding a job you like, why not create one for yourself? At first, I brushed it off. Create my own job? That sounded like a dream, not a reality. But then I realized I had nothing to lose. I was frustrated and aimless, but I had a few $1,000s saved up and a network of friends who were just as lost as I was. So I decided to take the leap. I started by doing something small. I created a little online store selling custom t-shirts. The idea came to me when I noticed a trend in quirky designs that were all the rage on social media. I didn't have the best designs, and I didn't have a fancy website, but I had an Instagram account. I posted a few photos of my t-shirts and began marketing them to my small circle of friends and followers. It was a slow start. For the first few months, I barely made enough to cover the cost of production. The designs weren't anything groundbreaking, but I quickly learned the value of persistence. I kept posting, kept engaging with my audience, and kept tweaking the designs. I also started running small ads on Instagram, targeting people who liked the same types of quirky, indie designs I was selling. One day, to my surprise, an influencer with a decent following stumbled across my page and shared one of my designs. That was the turning point. Sales started trickling in, and I had to hustle even harder. I was working a 9-to-5 job at the time, so I'd come home and spend hours designing new shirts, managing orders, and figuring out how to scale my operations. It was exhausting, but I was determined to make it work. The breakthrough moment came when I decided to invest in quality printing and packaging. Up until then, I was using cheap suppliers to keep costs low. But I realized if I wanted to build a real brand, I had to offer something that looked professional. I spent more money than I was comfortable with, but when the new shirts arrived, they were crisp and vibrant. The packaging was sleek and felt premium. I began photographing the shirts with better lighting and taking more time to perfect my brand image. Soon, my store was no longer just a side hustle. People were talking about it, sharing it, and buying from it. I started to see organic growth, and that's when I realized something important. Consistency and quality were everything. I kept improving the designs, learned how to interact with customers better, and focused on creating a community around my brand. After a year of sleepless nights, I decided to take another leap of faith. I quit my full-time job. I was terrified, but I couldn't keep juggling two things that demanded so much time and energy. I wasn't making a ton of money yet, but I was making enough to get by and felt like I had a real shot at growing this business. It wasn't all smooth sailing, though. There were setbacks. During my first holiday season, I had underestimated the demand. I ran out of stock halfway through, and it caused chaos. Customers were angry, and I lost some trust. I learned the hard way about inventory management, forecasting, and the need for a solid supply chain. That lesson cost me, but it was one I couldn't afford to ignore. I started hiring part-time help, especially for handling customer service and packing orders. I also outsourced the printing to a more reliable company, even though it was a little more expensive. That gave me the time and space to focus on marketing and expansion. Over the next few years, my business grew. I expanded the product line to include hats, hoodies, and even accessories like bags and socks. I also diversified into other niches, motivational designs, retro patterns, and custom items for local events and businesses. Word of mouth spread, and I started to build a loyal customer base. By the time I hit my 4th year in business, I had built a small team of designers, marketers, and customer service reps. We moved from my cramped apartment to a small office space and warehouse. It was an amazing feeling to see the business grow from my laptop on the kitchen table to a legitimate company with real employees. But the challenges didn't stop. By this point, I had competitors. Some of them were bigger and had more resources, while others were doing the same thing but with better designs or larger followings. I had to find ways to stand out. I started focusing on collaborations with artists and other brands. I also launched limited edition collections, which created a sense of urgency for customers. Looking back, the hardest part was trusting the process and pushing through when things felt uncertain. There were countless moments when I thought about giving up, when I felt like I was chasing something that didn't make sense. But over time, I learned that building something meaningful takes time, and there's no shortcut to success. Today, my company isn't a global powerhouse, but we've been profitable for the past 3 years. I've learned more than I ever thought I would about business, marketing, and leadership. More importantly, I've learned to trust my instincts and to keep moving forward, even when the odds seem stacked against me. I'm not a billionaire yet, but I'm proud of what I've built. And for the first time in years, I don't feel lost. I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, running my own business, creating something people love, and, most importantly, never looking back. If I had one piece of advice for anyone thinking of starting a business, it's this: take the leap. It's terrifying, and you'll fail along the way, but that's part of the journey. You'll learn, adapt, and come out stronger. Just keep going. I never thought I'd become an entrepreneur. My story begins in a small town, with a family that had been in the farming business for generations. I grew up on a modest farm, watching my parents work long hours just to keep the family afloat. While most of my friends dreamed of being doctors, astronauts, or celebrities, I just wanted to leave the farm behind. I wasn't built for hard labor, and I had no interest in continuing the family business. I wanted to get out of town, make something of myself, and prove to everyone, including myself, that I could build a life outside of this rural bubble. After high school, I moved to the nearest city and enrolled in a local university to study business. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew I didn't want to return to farming. My parents were disappointed but supportive. They thought I was chasing a dream that wasn't practical, but they didn't stop me from going. University life was a culture shock for me. I was used to wide-open spaces, dirt roads, and the smell of fresh manure, not crowded lecture halls and coffee shops. Still, I thrived in school. I was always the first one in class and the last one to leave. I asked questions, networked with professors, and got involved with as many extracurricular activities as I could. By the time I graduated, I had a solid understanding of business principles, and I was eager to dive into the corporate world. However, after a series of failed job interviews and dead-end internships, I started to get frustrated. Every opportunity one encountered seemed either irrelevant to my goals or filled with bureaucratic nonsense that suffocated my creativity. I realized that corporate America wasn't for me. I was only 23 when I decided to start my own business. It was a terrifying thought, but also exhilarating. I didn't have much savings, just a few $1,000s I'd saved up from odd jobs, freelance gigs, and a small inheritance from my grandmother. But I had one thing that no one could take away: my determination. I was going to build something from the ground up, even if it meant failing several times along the way. The idea came to me after spending weeks trying to figure out how to make a living while doing something I loved. I had always been fascinated by technology, and after a few deep dives into tech blogs and entrepreneurship forums, I stumbled upon the idea of developing a digital marketing agency. The more I researched, the more I realized that there was a massive demand for businesses to have an online presence, but not all of them had the resources to do so. I had no experience in digital marketing, but I knew I could learn. So, I immersed myself in courses, read books, and connected with people who had been successful in the space. I learned about SEO, Google Ads, content marketing, social media strategies, and everything in between. It was a steep learning curve, but I was all in. I knew this was my chance. I launched my business with almost no clients, just a website, some social media pages, and a lot of hustle. My first few months were incredibly difficult. I was cold calling businesses, offering free consultations in exchange for testimonials, and doing anything I could to get my name out there. My first client was a local coffee shop that didn't have a website or social media presence. They agreed to hire me after I explained how they could attract more customers by going digital. I built them a basic website, set up their social media profiles, and helped them create a content strategy. The results were immediate. Their foot traffic increased, and they started receiving more online orders. That success gave me the confidence I needed to keep pushing forward. I worked hard to get more clients, slowly building a portfolio. The problem was that as I gained more clients, I also found myself overwhelmed. I was the one doing everything: sales calls, project management, content creation, and implementation. I wasn't scaling my business, I was just running in circles. I quickly realized that if I wanted to grow, I would need to start building a team. It was a tough decision. I was still in my 20s, and the idea of bringing people into my small business was nerve-wracking. What if they didn't share my vision? What if I couldn't afford to pay them? But I knew that the only way to expand was to bring in help. So, I hired my first employee, a freelance graphic designer. She was a friend of a friend, and I trusted her work. At first, it was just her and me, working from coffee shops, brainstorming ideas, and hustling to deliver results. She was an absolute asset to my business, and we grew together. From there, the business continued to expand. I hired more people, built a solid team, and focused on improving processes and systems to make our work more efficient. I also invested in software to automate tasks and use data to track our progress. Each new step brought new challenges, but I learned from them, and my team's dedication helped me overcome every obstacle. Fast forward a few years, and my agency was no longer just a small operation. We were working with large clients, local businesses, national brands, and even a few international companies. I was able to take a step back and focus more on strategy, partnerships, and scaling. It wasn't all smooth sailing, though. We hit some major roadblocks along the way, including a few clients who turned out to be bad fits, some internal team drama, and several tight financial situations. But each time we faced a challenge, we grew stronger and more resilient. One of the most pivotal moments in my career came when we landed a contract with a major tech company. It wasn't an easy win. I had to pitch my agency to executives who were much more experienced than I was. But through persistence, research, and a clear understanding of their needs, we won the project. That was the moment I knew I had made it. My business had gone from a small startup to a recognized player in the digital marketing space. At 32, I had built something I was incredibly proud of. I wasn't just working for myself anymore. I had a team, a thriving business, and a platform to help other entrepreneurs. Today, my agency is a multi-million-dollar business, and we continue to grow. I still face challenges, but now I have the knowledge, experience, and resources to handle them. Looking back, it feels surreal. But my journey didn't end there. I realized that part of my success came from giving back, helping others who were in the same position I was when I started. So, I began mentoring young entrepreneurs, speaking at conferences, and investing in startups. I've learned that success isn't just about the money or the business. It's about creating opportunities for others and building something that lasts. I didn't expect to end up where I am today, but I wouldn't trade the journey for anything. The sleepless nights, the moments of doubt, the countless failures, they all led to something incredible. I'm proud of the business I built, but I'm even prouder of the lessons I learned along the way. I may have started with nothing but a dream and a few $1,000s, but I ended up building a life I'm genuinely passionate about. And if there's one thing I've learned through it all, it's that anyone with enough grit and determination can turn their dreams into reality. I still remember the first time I felt like I had truly made it as an entrepreneur. It wasn't when we hit $1 million in sales. It wasn't when we had a brand deal with a major company. It wasn't even when I could finally afford my first real vacation without checking my bank balance. It was the moment I saw my product on a shelf in a small local store, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. This was real. Let me rewind a bit. My entrepreneurial journey didn't start with some grand vision of disrupting industries or becoming the next billionaire. I was 26, fresh out of college with an MBA, and I had no clear path ahead. I did the typical thing, landed a decent corporate job at a marketing firm, and tried to convince myself that I was happy. I wasn't. I remember waking up every day dreading the 9-to-5 grind. I was living for the weekends, and that was no way to live. It wasn't until I had an off-the-cuff conversation with a friend at a bar that things started to change. My friend, who had started his own business selling eco-friendly products, told me about the struggles and successes he faced along the way. As he spoke, something clicked inside me. I had always been passionate about sustainability, but it hadn't occurred to me that I could build a business around it. I began to do some research on eco-friendly alternatives for everyday products. I quickly realized that there were plenty of options out there, but not many of them were marketed in a way that resonated with my generation. Most of the brands I saw were either too crunchy or too niche to appeal to a broad audience. I knew I could do better. In 2017, I quit my job. It wasn't an easy decision. I had just started climbing the corporate ladder, and the idea of leaving behind the stability was terrifying. But I knew I couldn't live a life of what-ifs. I packed my bags, moved back into my parents' house to save up, and spent the next few months working from the couch on my laptop, researching, testing products, and writing business plans. The first product I decided to launch was a reusable water bottle, but not just any water bottle. I wanted to create one that was sleek, stylish, and built to last. There were plenty of eco-friendly bottles out there, but they all looked the same. I didn't want my bottle to just be functional. I wanted it to be something people actually wanted to carry around. I took a deep dive into materials, stainless steel, bamboo, glass, and eventually settled on a high-quality, insulated stainless steel design. I knew I wanted to target the millennial and Gen Z demographic, so I focused heavily on the aesthetic. Bright, bold colors, sleek shapes, no clunky logos or unnecessary plastic. I hired a designer to help with the branding and created a website. The first month, I made exactly $0 in sales. I won't lie to you, it was disheartening. I had spent all that time designing the bottle, building the website, and marketing it, only to realize that simply launching a product doesn't mean people will magically come. That's when I began to understand the importance of marketing. I started posting on Instagram, showing off how sleek the bottles were and how they fit into everyday life. I reached out to micro-influencers, those with smaller but highly engaged followings, and asked them if they'd be willing to review my product in exchange for a free bottle. Some said yes, some ignored me, but it only took a few to really kick things off. The traction started building, slowly but surely. The turning point came when I reached out to a small online retailer who shared my values on sustainability. I pitched them my product, and to my surprise, they agreed to list it on their website. For the first time, my water bottles were officially for sale in a store that wasn't my own. That moment was a big milestone. It wasn't the huge sales boost I had hoped for, but it felt like validation. People were starting to recognize my product as more than just an idea. I wasn't just some guy with a dream anymore. I was a business owner, and this was real. From there, the business grew. Slowly at first, but then it picked up speed. I started getting more and more press. Small blogs and local news outlets began featuring my brand, and people who'd never heard of me started to recognize my bottles on the shelves of coffee shops, gyms, and stores. I could see the direct impact of the hard work I'd put in over the years. People were genuinely interested in the product. They saw value in it beyond just being eco-friendly. But as the company began to grow, so did the challenges. I quickly learned that scaling a business isn't all sunshine and rainbows. Managing inventory, handling customer service, and overseeing production, all of it became increasingly difficult. I had to hire a team, but finding the right people was not easy. Early on, I had a small team of just 3, me, a social media manager, and a part-time operations assistant. But as sales increased, the demands increased, and we needed more hands on deck. The first time I hired someone full-time was a huge step for me. It felt like I was no longer doing everything myself. But it was also scary. What if I couldn't afford to pay them? What if the business didn't keep growing? There were several moments in the early days of scaling that I felt like I was walking on a tightrope. There were cash flow issues, there were inventory delays, there were times when it felt like I was constantly fighting to stay afloat. But somehow, we made it through. I learned to lean on my team and trust the process. Fast forward to today, and things are much different. My brand is now in over 300 stores across the country. We've expanded to new products like eco-friendly lunchboxes, reusable straws, and sustainable travel accessories. Our social media following has grown into the hundreds of thousands, and we have a dedicated team of 20 people. But despite all the success, I still remember those early days, the sleepless nights, the doubts, the constant hustle. And every time I see my product on a shelf in a store, I remind myself how far we've come. It's not just about the financial success or the recognition. It's about knowing that my business has become something meaningful, a brand that helps people make better choices for the planet, while also giving them something they love. So, if you're reading this and you're thinking about taking the leap into entrepreneurship, I'll leave you with this. It's not going to be easy, but it will be worth it. Don't be afraid to fail, because the failures are where the lessons are. Don't rush the process. And most importantly, don't forget to celebrate the small wins along the way. I'm still on this journey, and while there are many challenges ahead, I know one thing for sure. I wouldn't want to be doing anything else. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. How I built my first $1 million business from scratch. I've always believed that entrepreneurship is about more than just building a business. It's about creating something that changes your life, and in many cases, changes the lives of others too. The funny part? When I started, I didn't even know what entrepreneurship really was. I was just trying to survive, trying to pay the rent, and trying to make something out of nothing. What I didn't realize was that all my struggles would be the foundation for something bigger. It all started when I was 24. I was fresh out of college with a degree in marketing, but the job market in my city was saturated. Every entry-level position seemed to require 5 years of experience, and internships weren't offering any more than a paycheck that barely covered my student loans. To make ends meet, I took up multiple side gigs. I was doing everything from waiting tables to freelance writing, but nothing seemed to stick. I felt like I was treading water, constantly working but not moving anywhere. One evening, I was browsing the internet, half listening to a podcast on my phone while working on a freelance project. The podcast mentioned something that stuck with me. The most successful entrepreneurs create businesses based on problems they've solved themselves. It wasn't an earth-shattering concept, but it clicked. That's when I had my epiphany. I thought about my own struggles as a young adult, low-paying jobs, student debt, and the stress of living paycheck to paycheck. I realized that most of my friends were in the same boat. Everyone was hustling, but still feeling like they were stuck in the same place. And then I thought, what if I could create something that helped people like me? Not just a side hustle, but a real business that could offer a real solution. I started researching the financial industry, looking for gaps. I knew that the problem wasn't just about earning money, it was about managing it, making smarter financial decisions, and building long-term wealth from the ground up. I quickly realized that financial literacy, especially in younger generations, was severely lacking. Many of my friends couldn't tell you the difference between a 401k and a Roth IRA. But they were smart, capable people. They just needed someone to explain things in a way that made sense. So I decided to create a digital platform aimed at helping millennials and Gen Z with their finances. The idea was simple: an app that provided easy-to-understand financial advice, budgeting tools, and ways to invest, all tailored for people who weren't experts in finance but wanted to get smarter with their money. I didn't have a tech background, but I was determined. I knew I needed to build a team, but I didn't have much money to spend. So I reached out to friends and colleagues who had skills in coding, marketing, and design. To my surprise, a few of them were just as interested in the idea as I was, so we formed a small team. We began working nights and weekends, coding the platform, designing the app, and developing content. The first few months were brutal. I was living off ramen noodles and the occasional delivery pizza, spending my days hustling side gigs and my nights working on the app. There were so many times I wanted to quit. The project wasn't bringing in any revenue, and there were bugs and glitches in the app that we couldn't seem to fix. Our team was really just a bunch of people juggling full-time jobs and freelance work, so getting everyone to stay motivated was challenging. But little by little, we made progress. We launched a basic version of the app and started offering free content, blogs, articles, videos, and guides on personal finance. We didn't have much of a user base at first, but I kept pushing the team to create high-quality, engaging content. We also started offering free financial webinars, hoping to build a community of followers who'd become customers down the line. The breakthrough came when we partnered with an influencer who had a strong following among young professionals. They loved the idea of a simple, accessible platform for personal finance, and they agreed to promote it on their social channels. That post changed everything. Within hours, our website traffic spiked and signups for the app skyrocketed. We went from having a handful of users to thousands within the span of a week. But even with the influx of new users, we still had to figure out how to monetize the app. We didn't want to go down the traditional route of charging users upfront, because we knew it would turn people off. Instead, we introduced a freemium model. Users could access basic features for free, but to unlock more advanced tools, like personalized financial plans, advanced budgeting, and investment trackers, they'd have to pay for a subscription. We also started offering exclusive content and one-on-one financial coaching sessions for an additional fee. It was a slow burn at first, but the combination of useful content and affordable pricing began to attract loyal users. The business was finally starting to make money. Over the next 2 years, we worked hard to improve the platform, add more features, and continue growing our user base. The app became more sophisticated, and we secured additional funding from angel investors who saw the potential in our mission. We hired a larger team and scaled operations. By the end of the second year, we had reached $1 million valuation. But here's the thing: despite the growth, I never let the money become the end goal. We were helping real people, and that's what kept me motivated. I regularly read user feedback, took suggestions seriously, and made sure that we were constantly improving our product. Every email or message I received from a user who said the app helped them pay off their debt or set aside money for a rainy day felt like the real reward. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far we've come. From a scrappy little project to a business that's now generating millions in revenue, it feels surreal. But I've learned a lot along the way. Entrepreneurship isn't about perfection. It's about persistence, learning from mistakes, and being willing to pivot when things aren't working. Now, as a seasoned entrepreneur, I often mentor young people who want to start their own businesses. I always tell them the same thing: don't wait for the perfect idea. Start with what you have and keep iterating until you find something that works. And most importantly, never forget why you're doing it. If you're passionate about solving a problem and you're willing to put in the work, the success will come. I may not have known what entrepreneurship was when I started, but I sure know what it is now. And honestly, I wouldn't change a thing. The journey, with all its ups and downs, was worth every second. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and big dreams were often stifled by small-town mentality. My family wasn't wealthy, but they were hardworking, and they did everything they could to provide for me and my younger sister. My dad was a mechanic, and my mom worked in retail. They both stressed the importance of education, but not once did they push for us to take risks. I think, looking back, they just wanted us to have stability in our lives. Despite their good intentions, I always felt like there was something missing in my life. I loved the idea of making something big happen, but the reality of my small town often kept me grounded. Everyone around me seemed to live for the weekend, working 9-to-5 jobs with the goal of surviving until retirement. I wanted more. I wanted to create something for myself, and eventually for others. After high school, I moved to a nearby city for college. I had no real plans, no grand business ideas, just the desire to break free from the limits of my small-town upbringing. I didn't want to end up like everyone else, working a standard job and hoping for a raise every year. So, I chose a major in business, thinking that maybe that would unlock the door to the life I wanted. I still had no clear idea of what exactly that would look like. The first few years of college were a blur. I studied hard, trying to make the grades, but also working part-time jobs to support myself. I didn't have much of a social life because I was focused on getting through school. But one thing stuck out to me during those years. I started noticing how many students were always walking around with coffee cups from the same chain. Starbucks, of course. I had never thought much about coffee before, but after observing how students and professionals alike couldn't seem to get through a day without their caffeine fix, I began to see an opportunity. In my sophomore year, I decided to open a small coffee stand on campus. I didn't have much capital, just a few $100s I had saved up from my part-time jobs, but I was determined to give it a shot. The first few months were rough. I didn't know the first thing about the coffee business. I was just an 18-year-old college student with a dream and a willingness to learn. I made every mistake imaginable. I bought cheap equipment that broke down all the time. I overpriced drinks because I thought they needed to be fancy, and I didn't realize how much time I had to spend preparing before the first customer arrived. The first few weeks were so discouraging that I thought about quitting more times than I can count. But slowly, things started to turn around. The key moment came when I realized that what people really wanted wasn't the fanciest cup of coffee, it was a fast, high-quality drink that they could grab on their way to class. I shifted my focus and started offering just a few simple, high-quality drinks, espresso, lattes, and cold brews, and offered them quickly. I also realized that students were looking for a place to study, so I started offering Wi-Fi and quiet spaces for people to work. In my third year, I made the decision to expand. I started offering pastries, bagels, and sandwiches to pair with the coffee. I also began hiring other students to help run the stand. By my senior year, my little stand was generating enough revenue to cover my tuition and living expenses. It wasn't just a part-time job anymore, it was a business. But with success came more challenges. I realized I had been too focused on the campus and hadn't paid enough attention to the broader picture. The coffee industry was becoming increasingly competitive, and national chains were starting to open more locations in the city. I had to figure out how to stand out and how to scale my business. That's when I decided to launch my own coffee brand. I reached out to local roasters and started developing a unique blend that would set my brand apart. I also realized that people were willing to pay a premium for an experience, not just a cup of coffee. So, I redesigned my store to make it feel like a cozy, welcoming space, and I began hosting small events, like open mics and art shows, to attract more customers. After graduation, I took a risk and opened a second location. I used a portion of my savings, took out a loan, and brought in investors. The first year was rough. There were months when I wasn't sure if I was going to make it. But with each challenge, I learned. I hired the right people, improved my marketing strategies, and made sure to stay connected to my customers. Word of mouth started spreading, and before I knew it, my little coffee shop was a go-to spot in the city. The turning point came when a local food critic reviewed my coffee and gave it a glowing recommendation. That's when everything changed. More customers flooded in, and soon I was getting calls from other cities asking if I'd consider opening a location there. By my third year in business, I had 5 locations spread across the city. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. With success came the pressures of scaling and maintaining quality. I had to let go of certain responsibilities, which was a huge challenge for me. I had to trust other people to handle things, and that was terrifying. But it was also necessary. The business grew, and I had to step back and let others take charge of day-to-day operations. Eventually, I got to a point where I could afford to be more strategic. I hired a team of managers and marketing experts to help me reach more customers. We started looking at franchising as an option, and by the time I was in my mid-30s, my coffee brand had expanded to over 30 locations across the country. Today, my coffee business is one of the most well-known independent chains in the United States. We still prioritize quality, customer service, and community engagement. Our locations are more than just coffee shops. They're places for people to connect, work, and be inspired. It's hard to believe that it all started with a single stand on a college campus with no experience and no capital. Looking back, I realized that the most important lesson I learned was to keep pushing forward, even when things seemed impossible. I was broke, inexperienced, and unsure of what I was doing at every turn. But I always believed that if I kept learning, kept working hard, and kept iterating, I could make it. And now, I'm living proof that taking risks, even when they seem absurd, can lead to success. The business isn't just a source of income for me now, it's my legacy. I'm proud of what I built, but I'm even prouder of the fact that I didn't let fear or doubt hold me back. My advice to anyone thinking about starting their own business is simple. If you believe in your idea, don't wait for the perfect moment. The right time is now. You'll figure it out as you go. Just keep moving forward. Now, every time I walk into one of my locations, I'm reminded of how far I've come and how many times I almost gave up. But I didn't. And that made all the difference. I'll start by saying this. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd go from barely making rent to running a business that has made 6 figures in less than 2 years. It wasn't always like this, though. It wasn't even close. 2 years ago, I was stuck in a dead-end job that barely paid my bills. I had a bachelor's degree in marketing, but for some reason, the only job I could land was working as a cashier at a local grocery store. The pay was low, the hours were unpredictable, and the environment was draining. I was living paycheck to paycheck, and every month, I was getting more frustrated and anxious about my future. I didn't know what to do or where to go next, but I knew something had to change. One evening, as I sat on my couch after a long shift, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, I came across a post about dropshipping. It was the classic story. Someone started a dropshipping store from their bedroom and made a fortune in 6 months. I thought to myself, I can do that, and I was determined to figure it out. So, I began researching. I didn't have much money to start with, but I knew that if I could learn the right skills and find the right niche, I could start making money from home. I spent hours reading articles, watching YouTube videos, and taking free online courses about e-commerce and dropshipping. I remember getting overwhelmed by all the information at first, but I kept pushing forward. Eventually, I stumbled upon a product that I thought had potential, a phone case with customizable designs. I knew the market for phone cases was huge, and the idea of customization would give me an edge. I was still working my cashier job at the time, but I figured, why not give this a try? I spent $200 to set up my first online store using Shopify. That money covered the cost of the website, some initial ads, and a small product order to test the waters. I remember feeling a mix of excitement and fear when I hit that launch button. I knew this could either make or break me. The first few weeks were brutal. No sales, not a single customer. I was feeling like a failure and wondering if I'd just wasted my time and money. But I didn't give up. I started tweaking my ads, changing the product descriptions, and trying different marketing tactics. I even joined some Facebook groups and Reddit threads about dropshipping to get feedback from other entrepreneurs. Slowly but surely, things started to pick up. About a month into the launch, I made my first sale. It wasn't much, a $10 profit after all the costs, but I was over the moon. It wasn't just the money, it was the validation that what I was doing could actually work. That tiny sale lit a fire under me. I started to experiment with different ad campaigns, trying to reach a larger audience. I got better at targeting specific demographics, testing different designs, and creating compelling offers. It wasn't an overnight success. In fact, it took me almost 6 months to make my first $1000 in profit. But at that point, I realized something crucial. I had learned so much, and my store was growing at a steady pace. I was reinvesting every dollar I made back into the business, improving my product, optimizing my website, and testing new marketing strategies. The turning point came when I discovered influencer marketing. I'd seen other dropshipping stores work with influencers on Instagram and YouTube, and I thought, why not try it? I reached out to a few micro-influencers who had around 10K to 50K followers, offering them free product samples in exchange for a shout-out. The results were immediate. Sales started pouring in, and my brand started to gain recognition. I could see the potential, and it was like a switch flipped in my brain. I wasn't just selling phone cases anymore. I was building a brand. By the time I hit the 1-year mark with my store, I had learned a ton. I was no longer working my cashier job. In fact, I had quit it months earlier. My business was making enough to support me full-time, and I had even hired a virtual assistant to help with customer service and product sourcing. I had transitioned from a small-time seller to a full-fledged entrepreneur with a growing online business. But here's the kicker. I still wasn't making the big bucks. Sure, I was making a comfortable living, but I wasn't raking in the millions I had seen in those I made $100K in 30 days posts. I realized that I had gotten comfortable. I had plateaued, and the thought of pushing beyond that scared me. I didn't want to fail, but I also didn't want to be stuck in the same position forever. So, I pushed myself again. I hired a business coach who had experience scaling e-commerce stores. I started focusing on improving my customer experience, faster shipping times, better packaging, and more personalized interactions with customers. I expanded my product line to include not just phone cases, but also accessories like wireless chargers, earphones, and even some clothing items. I learned to diversify, and that's when things really started to take off. By the time my second year rolled around, I was bringing in $10K a month in revenue. Not just profits, $10K in sales. I had multiple employees, a warehouse to store my inventory, and partnerships with suppliers that allowed me to scale even faster. My ads were more refined, and I had a loyal customer base. The money started rolling in, but what truly made me proud was the fact that I had built something from the ground up. I wasn't just another person following the get-rich-quick formula. I was running a real business with employees and responsibilities. Fast forward to today, and I'm proud to say that my business has made over $100K in profit this year alone. I'm no longer living paycheck to paycheck, and I'm not worried about paying rent or whether I can afford groceries. I've even started mentoring other aspiring entrepreneurs, sharing what I've learned along the way. The journey has been anything but easy, and I've faced countless challenges, but the rewards have been worth every sleepless night and every doubt I had along the way. I'm sharing this story because I want to encourage anyone who feels stuck. If you're in a job you hate or struggling to make ends meet, don't give up. There's always a way out, but it takes hard work, persistence, and a willingness to learn from your mistakes. If I can go from working as a cashier to running a six-figure business, I truly believe anyone can do it. I had always been the kind of person who dreamed big but never quite believed that I could make those dreams a reality. Growing up in a small town, my world was limited to the four corners of the schoolyard, my neighborhood, and the occasional trip to the next town over to visit family. There wasn't much opportunity around me, and even though I knew I wanted to do something more with my life, the idea of being an entrepreneur seemed so far out of reach. I started my career in a typical 9-to-5 job, working as a customer service representative at a call center. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady, and that's what mattered. I figured I'd climb the corporate ladder over time, get promoted, and maybe one day, I'd have the kind of job that made me proud to tell people about. But after a few years, I realized that climbing the ladder wasn't all it was cracked up to be. My work felt repetitive, unfulfilling, and I started to grow resentful of the system. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I knew I couldn't do this forever. One evening, I was scrolling through social media when I stumbled upon a post about a local business owner who had started their own company with only a fraction of what I thought was necessary to build a successful business. They didn't have a degree in business, they weren't from a wealthy background, and they didn't have any special connections. They were just like me, but they had taken a risk and made something of themselves. That post stuck with me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I had always thought that starting a business was something reserved for people with tons of capital, connections, and a perfect business plan. But this post showed me a different side of entrepreneurship, one that didn't require perfection, just a willingness to start somewhere, anywhere. For the next few weeks, I spent every spare moment researching. I watched YouTube videos, read blogs, and joined online forums. I was consuming information nonstop, but every time I felt like I was getting closer to understanding how to start a business, I'd encounter another obstacle. The more I learned, the more overwhelmed I became. Everyone seemed to have a clear path forward, but I didn't. I had no experience, no business plan, and definitely no funding. But there was one thing I had, an idea. It wasn't groundbreaking or revolutionary, but it was something that I knew would help people. I was always the person who had the best recommendations for new products, whether it was a gadget, a software tool, or something niche that I had come across on my own. I had a passion for finding useful, cool products that could make life easier, and I realized that there was a market for these kinds of recommendations. After months of research, I decided to take the leap. I didn't have a lot of money saved up, but I had a little. I used a portion of it to build a website. It wasn't the fanciest website, just a simple blog format, but it was enough to get started. I poured hours into writing product reviews, curating lists of recommended products, and sharing my personal experiences. I wasn't trying to reinvent the wheel. I just wanted to share what I genuinely loved. For the first few months, nothing happened. My website had almost no traffic, and I wasn't making a single sale. I wasn't discouraged, though. I knew that any new business would take time to gain traction. What I didn't anticipate was the amount of time I would need to spend learning how to market myself. My content was good, but I had no idea how to get it in front of people. I read books on SEO, took online courses on social media marketing, and experimented with paid ads. Slowly but surely, I started seeing results. I remember the first time I got an email saying that someone had bought a product through one of my affiliate links. I was ecstatic. It wasn't much, it was only a few dollars, but it was a sign that what I was doing was working. Over the next year, I focused all my energy on growing my website and brand. I refined my process, learned about email marketing, and started building an online community. I was writing more, posting on social media, and optimizing my content for search engines. The traffic to my website started growing, and with it, so did my sales. By the end of that first year, I had managed to generate a modest income, enough to cover my expenses and reinvest into the business. The next year, things began to snowball. I started diversifying my content and branching out into video reviews. I teamed up with a few influencers who had larger followings and worked out deals for them to promote my website. My brand started getting recognition, and my sales grew exponentially. I was able to quit my day job and work on my business full-time, but the journey was far from over. In fact, it felt like I was just getting started. One of the biggest lessons I learned was that entrepreneurship wasn't about having a flawless business plan or the perfect product. It was about persistence. There were so many times I could have given up when things weren't going well, when the bills started piling up, and when I had no idea if I was even doing the right thing. But every time I felt like quitting, I reminded myself that the only way I could fail was if I stopped trying. Fast forward to today, and my business is not only successful but thriving. I've expanded into other niches, hired a small team, and even started working on creating my own product line. It still feels surreal, and there are moments when I can't believe how far I've come from the small town with little opportunity to being an entrepreneur with a legitimate online business. But I also know that I couldn't have done it without the failures and the lessons I learned along the way. If there's one thing I want others to take away from my story, it's this. No one has it all figured out, and it's okay to start small. Don't let fear hold you back, and don't compare your journey to anyone else's. Every step, no matter how small, is progress. Take it one day at a time, and keep moving forward, even when things get tough. That's how I turned a simple idea into a successful business, and I'm proud to say that it all started with taking that first leap, even when I didn't have all the answers. And to anyone reading this who feels stuck or unsure if they can make it, you absolutely can. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Keep pushing forward, because if I can do it, so can you. I was 26 when I first got the idea to start my own business. I had spent the last 4 years working as a software developer at a mid-sized company. I wasn't miserable, but I wasn't thriving either. The work was stable, my salary was decent, and the people were nice enough, but deep down, I felt like I was just going through the motions. I spent a lot of time thinking about what I really wanted to do with my life, but it always came back to the same thought. I could be doing something more meaningful. It was during a routine dinner with some friends that the idea sparked. We were talking about a recent experience I had while working with an e-commerce platform for a client. They had hired me to create a custom feature for their website. Long story short, the whole project turned into a disaster, not because of the code I wrote, but because of how the platform itself handled updates, integrations, and the overall user experience. I spent hours troubleshooting issues that could have been easily avoided with a more intuitive system. As I vented my frustrations over dinner, one of my friends, who was also in the tech field, asked me, "Why don't you create a better platform?" At first, I laughed. I'm not some tech CEO with billions to burn. I'm just a guy who builds things for other people. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Why couldn't I do something like that? I had the skills. I knew what was broken in the industry. The question wasn't whether I could do it. It was whether I was willing to take the risk. So, over the next few weeks, I started researching and planning. I wanted to build a simple, reliable e-commerce platform for small businesses. Something that was easy to use, customizable, and cost-effective. Most platforms at the time were either too complex or too expensive for small business owners, and I saw an opportunity to fill that gap. It wasn't long before I was writing a business plan, learning about the legalities of starting a company, and considering how I was going to fund this venture. My savings weren't going to get me very far, so I looked into securing a loan or finding investors. That's when reality hit me. I had no idea how to pitch my idea to anyone, let alone get anyone to take me seriously. I spent the next few months perfecting my pitch and building a prototype of the platform. I knew I needed a website to showcase the product, so I used my software development skills to create a basic, but functional, demo of the platform. It wasn't perfect, but it was good enough to show the potential of what I was trying to build. I also reached out to friends and family to help fund the project, offering them equity in the company in exchange for their investment. Getting the first $25,000 in funding was a huge relief. It wasn't much, but it was enough to cover the basic operational costs, a small team of developers, and marketing. I also quit my day job, which was both exhilarating and terrifying. I was going all in, and there was no turning back. The early days were a blur. I spent most of my time coding, hiring freelancers, and testing the platform. The development process was slower than I had hoped, mainly because we ran into several technical hurdles that we didn't anticipate. I learned a lot of hard lessons along the way, like how important it was to have a clear roadmap and to not skimp on testing. Our early users were forgiving, but I knew I couldn't afford to keep releasing half-baked products. As time went on, the platform started to take shape. We launched in beta, and to our surprise, we had a steady stream of users signing up. The feedback was mixed, but that was to be expected. Some people loved it, while others found issues with the system. We used that feedback to improve the product, but what really helped was the early adopters who stuck with us. They believed in what we were doing, and they were willing to help us grow. By the end of the first year, we had 1,000 users. It wasn't a massive success, but it was enough to show us that we were on the right track. I could see the potential for growth, but I also knew we needed to ramp up our marketing efforts. We had been relying on word of mouth and organic growth, but that was never going to be enough to take us to the next level. That's when I made the decision to hire a full-time marketing manager. I had been doing everything myself up until then, from coding to customer service to marketing, but I realized that I couldn't scale the business without help. The first few months with the new hire were rocky. It took a while to find someone who understood our brand and could help drive traffic to our platform. But once we hit our stride, things started to pick up. Our user base grew, and we started signing on bigger clients. I focused on building relationships with partners and creating more advanced features for the platform. We started to generate revenue, and for the first time, I felt like we were really building something that could change the way people did business. But with success came new challenges. The platform had grown quickly, and with that growth came growing pains. Our servers couldn't handle the traffic, our support team was overwhelmed, and we were constantly trying to juggle new features with fixing bugs. There were times when I thought we might collapse under the pressure, but we pushed through. We hired more people, streamlined our processes, and learned how to scale. Fast forward to today, and we've grown into a company with over 50 employees and thousands of active users. We've raised additional funding, expanded our product offerings, and entered new markets. I look back at where I started, sitting at a dinner table venting about a frustrating project, and I still can't believe how far we've come. Starting this business has been the most challenging thing I've ever done, but it's also been the most rewarding. I've learned more about myself, my strengths, and my weaknesses than I ever could have imagined. I've had to make tough decisions, face failure, and learn how to lead a team. But every challenge has been an opportunity to grow and improve. If there's one thing I've learned through this whole process, it's that entrepreneurship is about perseverance. It's about taking that first step, even when you don't know if you'll succeed. And it's about constantly learning and adapting as you go. There's no magic formula for success, but if you're passionate, dedicated, and willing to put in the work, anything is possible. It all started when I was just 24. Fresh out of college with a degree in marketing, I felt like I had it all figured out. I had landed a stable job at a mid-sized advertising agency in the city, and everything seemed perfect. I was on a decent salary, had a great group of friends, and the future looked bright. But even then, something felt off. I had this nagging feeling that I was meant for something bigger, something beyond the desk and the monotonous routine of my 9-to-5 job. I had always been entrepreneurial, even from a young age. I sold handmade jewelry during high school, then moved on to designing websites for small businesses in college. But it wasn't until I stumbled upon a business idea that truly resonated with me that I decided to take the plunge. It happened one evening after work. I was scrolling through Instagram and saw an ad for a subscription box service that curated unique, eco-friendly products. It was one of those niche, feel-good companies that had a small but loyal following. The idea seemed so simple yet brilliant, and in that moment, something clicked. I was fascinated by the idea of a subscription box but realized that the eco-friendly market was just one small piece of the puzzle. What if there were a box that catered to a broader audience, one that offered high-quality, locally sourced, and unique items from artisans and small businesses across the country? I started brainstorming, and before I knew it, the idea for my own subscription service was born. But here's the thing, I had no experience in e-commerce. I didn't have connections in the artisan world, and I definitely didn't know how to source products at a competitive price. The only thing I had was a dream, a fierce determination, and a whole lot of ignorance about how hard it would be to start from scratch. I knew that if I was going to make this work, I needed to learn quickly. So, I immersed myself in research. I read books, listened to podcasts, and spent countless hours on YouTube, learning about everything from e-commerce platforms to customer acquisition strategies. I even reached out to other entrepreneurs for advice, even though I was terrified of seeming clueless. The first major obstacle came when I had to decide how to actually create the product boxes. I had a vague idea of what I wanted, but I had no idea where to start sourcing products. It felt like an impossible task, especially because I had no budget to hire a team or work with expensive consultants. I started small, reaching out to local artisans, makers, and small businesses that might be interested in collaborating. To my surprise, many of them were willing to partner with me, even if it was just for a small trial run. At the same time, I had to figure out the logistics of the business. I needed a website, a payment system, a packaging solution, and most importantly, a way to ship these boxes efficiently. I spent nights designing my own website, which, looking back, was a bit of a disaster, figuring out how to set up automated billing systems, and researching packaging materials that would reflect the brand's eco-friendly ethos. Slowly but surely, everything began to fall into place. The first batch of boxes was ready to ship, and I couldn't believe it. I had built something from nothing, and the excitement was overwhelming. But the reality of starting a business quickly set in. I had 0 customers, and no one knew my brand. The only people who knew about it were my friends and family, and while they were supportive, I knew they weren't going to be the key to success. I threw myself into marketing. I cold emailed influencers, reached out to bloggers, and spent every spare moment on social media trying to build a following. I had no budget for paid ads, so I had to get creative. I started offering giveaways and running contests, hoping to generate buzz. Slowly but surely, a small but loyal following began to emerge. At first, it was just a few people ordering here and there. But then something unexpected happened. One of the influencers I had reached out to posted about my subscription box, and overnight, sales exploded. I went from getting a few orders a week to hundreds in just a matter of days. My website crashed multiple times, and I had no idea how to handle the influx of orders. I quickly realized that I had grossly underestimated the logistical side of running a subscription business. I was spending hours packing boxes, trying to keep up with demand, and still trying to manage everything else. It was overwhelming, to say the least. I was working 16-hour days, barely sleeping, and struggling to keep up with my full-time job. I knew I couldn't do it all on my own, so I took a leap of faith and quit my job. I invested the little savings I had left into hiring a small team to help with fulfillment and customer service. It was a huge risk, but I knew it was now or never. As the business grew, so did the challenges. I had to navigate supply chain issues, deal with upset customers, and constantly refine my marketing strategies. But the rewards were also there. The brand became a recognized name in the subscription box space, and I started forming partnerships with larger retailers. The subscription box became more than just a side hustle, it became my full-time business. But even as things were going well, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. I realized that while my subscription box was successful, I had built it without a true sense of purpose. The products in the boxes were amazing, but they didn't tell a story that was uniquely mine. So, I took a step back and reevaluated the brand. I spent months traveling, meeting with artisans, and learning about the communities behind the products I was sourcing. I realized that if I was going to truly make an impact, I needed to incorporate a mission into the business, something that would resonate not just with customers but with my own sense of purpose. That's when I pivoted the business. I shifted the focus of the subscription box to include items that were not only locally sourced, but also sustainable and made by underrepresented groups, women, minorities, and artisans in developing countries. I wanted to give them a platform and amplify their stories. It wasn't easy to make the transition, and I lost some customers along the way who didn't fully understand the new direction. But the ones who remained were more loyal than ever, and the impact of the mission resonated in a way that I had never anticipated. Today, the business is thriving. We've expanded our product offerings, created exclusive partnerships with well-known brands, and are shipping boxes worldwide. Looking back, I never could have predicted how far I'd come. From struggling with the logistics of packaging and fulfillment to now running a full-scale business with a team of over 30 people, it's been a wild ride. There have been plenty of setbacks along the way, but I've learned that each failure is just a stepping stone to something better. If you had told me 5 years ago that I'd be where I am today, I would have laughed. But sometimes, the hardest and most unexpected paths lead to the greatest rewards. The journey has been exhausting, exhilarating, and humbling, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. I'll be honest, I never thought I would end up here, working for myself, building a company from the ground up, and waking up every day to an inbox full of opportunities. In fact, just a few years ago, I was a broke college dropout living in my parents' basement, thinking I had messed up my entire future. Let me rewind. I was always the entrepreneurial type growing up. When I was younger, I'd set up lemonade stands, resell toys at garage sales, or offer my services fixing bikes and cleaning up yards for the elderly neighbors. I didn't know it then, but those early hustles would lay the foundation for what was to come. In school, I didn't exactly fit the traditional student mold. I was always a bit rebellious, questioning why I had to do things in a certain way. I wasn't bad at school, but I didn't love it, and I often found myself asking, why does everyone assume this is the only path to success? After high school, I took the typical next step and enrolled in college, though deep down, I wasn't sure why. My parents had pushed for it, and everyone else seemed to be going. I was just following the crowd. In hindsight, it was the worst decision I could have made. I had no real passion for my studies. I barely showed up to class, and when I did, it was only because I didn't want to disappoint my parents. I quickly found out I wasn't cut out for the 9 to 5 grind either. It just felt like I was wasting time. About halfway through my second semester, I reached a breaking point. I was drowning in student loans, and my grades were slipping. I felt stuck, overwhelmed, and unsure of my next move. That's when I made the drastic decision to drop out. My parents were furious, and they honestly thought I was throwing my life away. But deep down, I knew I couldn't continue down this path. Something inside me was screaming that I was meant to do more, but I had no idea what that more was. Fast forward a year, and I'm still living at home with my parents, scraping together odd jobs. It wasn't glamorous, but I was starting to feel a spark again. One evening, while scrolling through Reddit, where else, I stumbled upon a post about dropshipping. It sounded too good to be true. Someone was talking about making money selling products without having to hold any inventory. You just find a supplier, set up an online store, and let the supplier handle the shipping. I thought, this could be my shot. I spent the next few months learning everything I could about dropshipping. I read blogs, watched YouTube tutorials, and joined forums. I felt like I was on the verge of something big. But then came the first hurdle, money. I didn't have enough to set up a website, buy ads, or even purchase products to test the model. All I had was about $200 saved up from my odd jobs and my parents' reluctant approval to give it a shot. I spent those $200 to buy a cheap website template and started selling simple phone accessories. I felt like I was on top of the world when I made my first sale, a whopping $5. But I was hooked. It wasn't the money that excited me. It was the fact that it was real. I had made something out of nothing. That small win pushed me to keep going. But, like any entrepreneur's journey, it wasn't smooth sailing. I made a ton of mistakes, like choosing the wrong supplier who shipped out damaged products, setting up ads that didn't convert, and wasting money on strategies that didn't work. I lost nearly all of my $200. I was ready to quit. I almost did, actually. But instead of quitting, I reevaluated everything. I went back to the drawing board. I read more books, reached out to mentors online, and spent months honing my craft. I finally found a supplier who delivered quality products on time, and I optimized my ads to target the right audience. Slowly but surely, Sales started coming in. Not a lot, but enough to keep me going. By the end of my first year in dropshipping, I had made a grand total of $4,000 in profit. It wasn't much, but it was something, and that something lit a fire in me. I decided to scale up. I invested what little I had left into better advertising, refining my website, and experimenting with new products. This time, things started to click. I hired a small team to handle customer service, a virtual assistant to help with tasks, and invested in automated systems to keep the business running smoothly. The first time I saw a $500 day in sales was a moment I'll never forget. It was like I had finally cracked the code. With my dropshipping business now growing, I knew I needed more. I didn't want to be just another dropshipper selling cheap products from China. I wanted to build a real brand that people would recognize and trust. So, I started developing my own products. This took a lot of time and research, and I had to learn everything from sourcing, product design, and even branding. But it paid off. Fast forward to today. My company is no longer a small side hustle. We've expanded into a full-fledged e-commerce business with our own line of products. We've got a dedicated team, warehouses in multiple locations, and an online presence that reaches customers across the globe. I've even been able to hire a few of my old friends who were in the same position I was, struggling to figure out life. I'm proud of what we've built, but I'm also humble about it. I know this journey has been a roller coaster, full of ups and downs. There were times when I felt like giving up, times when I was on the brink of bankruptcy, and times when I wasn't sure I could keep going. But here I am. If there's one lesson I've learned from all of this, it's that success doesn't come overnight. There's no magical formula, no one-size-fits-all path to follow. It's all about persistence, constantly learning, and being willing to take risks. Most importantly, it's about failing and failing forward. If you're out there reading this, stuck in your own struggles, feeling like things aren't going to work out, keep going. You don't have to have everything figured out. You don't have to follow the traditional path. Just take that first step, no matter how small. You have no idea what might be waiting for you on the other side. I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. Not really. I like structure, regular paychecks, health insurance that didn't make me cry at night. My dad was the opposite, ran a small auto shop for 20 years and never seemed to sleep. I watched him lose his hair over inventory, payroll, and the fact that someone named Lenny kept stealing oil filters. So naturally, I chose a safe career in corporate finance. I worked at a mid-sized firm in Chicago, where my biggest excitement was sometimes a bagel Friday. My job? Forecasting cash flows for clients who made more money sneezing than I did working 60-hour weeks. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the rent and let me afford decent whiskey. I was cruising through life, content enough. That all changed because of a printer. It started during the pandemic. I was working from home in my one-bedroom apartment. I had a cheap printer that refused to print unless all ink cartridges were full, even if I just wanted black and white. It pushed me over the edge one morning. I had a Zoom meeting at 9 a.m. and needed to print a contract to sign, and of course, it wouldn't print because the yellow cartridge was empty. Yellow. I wasn't even printing in color. Frustrated, I posted a rant on Twitter. If someone makes a printer that doesn't require a full rainbow of ink to work, I will throw all my money at them. It got a few likes, nothing major, but one reply caught my eye. It was from an old college buddy, James, who replied, "Let's build one." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. James was an engineer, worked on robotics for a defense contractor, and apparently had been toying with printer designs for fun. We started texting, and he explained how most consumer printers are designed to fail or inconvenience users into buying more ink. It was a business model, not a tech limitation. That infuriated me more. So we started talking more seriously. I had savings, he had skills. Maybe we could make something better. Not just a printer, but a company built on transparency, upfront pricing, durable design, and no software that blocks third-party ink. It sounded naive, but the idea wouldn't leave us alone. We began working evenings and weekends, sketching ideas, ordering parts off Alibaba, trying to cobble together a prototype. James was in St. Louis, I was in Chicago. Our Zoom meetings became daily. We decided early on we didn't want to make a cheap printer. We wanted to make the printer durable, reparable, hackable even, for the nerds out there. After about 6 months, we had a working prototype. It was ugly, exposed wires, 3D printed casing, but it worked. Black and white laser printing, no DRM, and it didn't care if the toner was third-party. We posted a demo on Reddit in r/technology. It blew up. Thousands of upvotes, people begging us to launch a Kickstarter. That's when I left my job. My manager thought I was nuts. So did my mom. But the interest was real. We launched our Kickstarter under the name TrustPrint. Our goal was $50,000. We raised $210,000 in 30 days. The joy lasted about a week. We were not ready. Prototyping one printer is one thing. Manufacturing 1,000 is something else entirely. We had no supply chain, no warehouse, no team. I was taking support emails from my couch and using Gmail labels to organize them. James was losing sleep over firmware bugs. The Chinese factory we partnered with ghosted us for a month, then came back saying our design was too complex and they'd need to change it to meet the quote. That triggered a whole redesign. Backers started getting restless. We were 2 months behind. I wrote updates, trying to be transparent, but some people accused us of running a scam. I remember one email, "Hope you're enjoying the beach with my $179." I wasn't. I hadn't showered in 2 days. Eventually, we got the printers made, 492 units. Shipping cost more than we'd budgeted by a mile because of pandemic surcharges. We ate a loss of $38,000, but people got their printers. Reviews were mixed. Everyone loved the concept, but some had jamming issues, and one unit caught fire because the wiring harness melted. We recalled that batch and fixed it. Still, something clicked. We had a real product. A community formed around it. People started modding their printers, adding Raspberry Pi integrations, even open-source drivers. A subreddit popped up. That's when we realized our real market wasn't general consumers. It was hackers, indie developers, educators. People who hated proprietary nonsense as much as we did. We leaned in. Our second product, TrustPrint 1 Pro, was more robust, had an aluminum frame, and allowed full disassembly with one hex key. We launched it on our own site. No Kickstarter this time. It sold out in 3 weeks. We hired our first employee, a support engineer named Carla, who had built her own laser cutter. Then a second, a logistics manager who had previously worked at a drone startup. We set up shop in a small warehouse outside Milwaukee. Not glamorous, but cheap and functional. We're 3 years in now. We've shipped 4,300 printers. We're profitable, not wildly, but enough to pay ourselves modest salaries and reinvest. We still don't do venture funding. We take pre-orders, communicate with our community, and build slow, ugly, honest tech. Looking back, it all started because of a printer that refused to print black and white without yellow ink. If that printer had just worked, I'd probably still be forecasting earnings for companies I didn't care about. Now, I own a company that people tell me makes their lives easier. That's worth every gray hair I've gotten along the way. The kicker? My dad uses our printer in his auto shop now. Says it's the only one he's ever had that didn't make him want to throw it through a window. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.